He'll spend 35 years in prison for the abuse he orchestrated as the head of a grooming gang, responsible for what the judge called an appalling catalogue of offending.
There were times when I thought, oh God, is this ever going to end? And it just felt like
It's taken 15 years for this victim to see him finally answer for her abuse.
He's took my life away, so now I feel like I've took his. He's never going to be back out on these streets again for 35 years. I've got justice now. That's what I came for the truth and for justice, and I've been able to do it.
Justice too for Arshid's brothers. Basharat, a 25-year sentence, and Banaras, who pleaded guilty, will serve 19.
I'm just really pleased for the victims. The victims, the vast majority, were in court. Really positive day for them. Emotions were high. Probably the most intense and emotional day I've had in Crown Court and will for a long time, if not ever.
How far do you think this result today goes towards rebuilding the reputation of your force?
I'm not seeking to defend anything that's happened in the past. This investigation was about gathering evidence over the last 2.5 years, and as police officers we wake up every single day wanting to put vile criminals, organised criminals and paedophiles in prison.
But for many years that wasn't always the case. The Hussains acted unchallenged because police officers and social workers were unable or unwilling to stop them. The judge today recognised the courage of the victims forced to relive their ordeal. She also emphasised the lasting impact on their lives, the sense of shame, the panic attacks, the eating disorders and self-harm. Nobody, she said, would forget the victim who told the court she'd been left hating her own body because of what she'd been through. Also responsible for the abuse was Karen McGregor, jailed for 13 years for forcing vulnerable young women to act as prostitutes after offering them a home. Shelley Davis also lived there and was given an 18-month suspended sentence. The Hussain's uncle, Kurban Ali, will serve 10 years for conspiring with them to rape a girl. This is him leaving an earlier hearing. His son, who wasn't involved in this trial, later pleaded guilty to assaulting a photographer. The Hussains had believed they were above the law. Today, finally, their rule over Rotherham streets is over. But across that town, going back so many years, there are many more victims still waiting for justice. Dan Johnson, BBC News at Sheffield Crown Court.
Let's speak now to the journalist who first uncovered the scale of the Rotherham grooming scandal. Andrew Norfolk is the Times newspaper's chief investigative reporter. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. What was your reaction to these lengthy sentences, having followed the case from the very beginning?
This was a big day today for the Times, but far more importantly for so many young women who many years ago had their childhood stolen from them, who have in some cases very sadly led largely broken lives, who had the courage to come forward finally and to have a jury 2 days ago pronounce verdicts that meant that their stories had been believed, that it wasn't their fault. That was a big day, but today they actually, most of them were in court to see the men who abused them so badly, and they heard the words of a judge who said that what was done to them was unforgivable, and it was.
I know that the women and young girls who were subject to this appalling abuse are very grateful to the work that you did. One of them said, Andrew Norfolk printed my story, thank God he did. That triggered the J report, that triggered everything. Everything has happened was due to Andrew printing the story. What was your reaction when you first started digging around and finding this evidence?
The investigation that I've been doing for the Times into child exploitation involving groups of men, organised groups of men and young girls, began in the autumn of 2010. This is coming up for the 6th year. We published our first story in January 2011, and that was about a national picture. It was about a culture of silence in terms of even acknowledging what was happening. But within a week I had my first full phone call that came from a Rotherham grandfather who wanted to talk about what had happened to his 13-year-old granddaughter. And that was the first of what became a series of stories in which it became clear that there was something very different about Rotherham, the sheer scale of what was happening, and the seeming blindness with which the social services and the police were treating this. And in September 2012, a very brave person, having handed me more than 200 confidential documents, we laid bare a picture of more than a decade in that town where men had been targeting, grooming, pimping, trafficking young girls. They were doing so with virtual impunity, and they were doing so despite the fact that the knowledge was there, the documents were there, the names of the girls, the names of the men, the places they were being taken to, the cars, the taxi firms, the takeaways. When we published that, we thought there would be such an outcry that police would immediately launch an inquiry, and the council would desperately want to know what had gone wrong. Instead, police remained in 2012 in complete denial. They insisted they were leading the way nationally in tackling such crimes, and the only inquiry that the council ordered was to try to find the source of the leak. Now, that's what kept us going, and in the early summer of 2013, a message was left on my phone from a young woman who sounded very nervous. It led to a meeting and then a series of meetings, and to the story we published in August 2013. That was the girl we called Jessica, and you've heard her a few minutes ago. She was incredibly brave to come forward. It was her story, when we told it, that triggered the entire criminal inquiry. She gave her first filmed interview on the very day we published that story, and within 12 days Rotherham Council bowed to overwhelming public pressure and finally commissioned what became the J inquiry, and a year later that inquiry was published and found that 1,400 girls had been abused over 16 years. The scale of this has been quite extraordinary, and what today brought was the concrete physical reality of all those reports and inquiries and comments and resignations. Today was men who had done this. Today was girls who were so damaged being told it wasn't your fault.
Andrew, how much wider spread is this beyond Rotherham, in other places across the country?
We have seen large cases, as you may remember, from Rochdale, from Oxford. There have been other cases that haven't received such publicity, but in the 5 years that I've been